Welcome to the Energy Show. We're recording this on March 27th, 2025. And show is all about rooftop solar. And I'm going to be talking to Phil McKay, who's with the Canadian Renewable Energy Association, because rooftop solar has arrived. We've been talking about this for a long time, but it's here and it makes a lot of sense. And we got lots of good information for you that you're going to like. So welcome to the interview, Phil.
Thanks for having me on.
Now, the two things that I think have changed a lot in the last year or two is the cost of panels have come down. Solar panels have come down. So we're seeing like in China, it's like 9 cents a watt per panel. Europe was around 22 cents. North America was around 40 cents. But so prices have come down. But also battery storage has come down because now I would imagine that most people want to get storage combined with solar when they get it installed.
Yeah, you got it. It's a pretty traceable trend at this point. We saw it with wind energy, we've seen it with solar, now we're seeing it with energy storage. And that's where Canria plays for the most part, wind, solar, and energy storage in that combination.
And one of the things that's fascinating to me is utilities resisted this for a long time. They saw it as cannibalizing their business model. But now, we see it a lot more in the US than here. Canada has 10 grids, provincial power grids, but they're all, for the most part, pretty stable, low cost. Canada's very clean, 84% non-emitting power generation. But down in the US, I mean, people are saying, whoa, I mean, we got wildfires, we've got, power grid outages, ice storms. And one of the main impetuses to buying this is security in case you have a problem.
Yeah, we see that as one of the emerging use cases. I think there's been a lot of incentive for people who wanted to decarbonize or they like the idea of it. They had the capital to spend and so they wanted it on their rooftop. And now you're seeing a lot more use cases, a lot more drivers for the industry, which is just expanding the market, expanding the demographics of people who are interested. And it's that value stack too, right? It might be worth it to you to have that ride through capability of a certain type of event or more electrification in your home. And so that just adds on to the value that was already there for securing your electricity bill.
Here's a wrinkle to this we don't talk about nearly enough, is that businesses and commercial in particular are really interested in this because a lot of them are very intensive and they want to lower their costs. And so taking advantage of solar plus storage is a great way to do that. And a lot of them, now this is again a trend more in the United States yet, hasn't got up to Canada, but virtual power plants,
Yeah.
where there's an aggregator and they bring together thousands, tens of thousands of solar installations, and they control how the electricity gets marketed into the grid. They arbitrage it so that they sell as high as they can, and so the savings are even greater, and the utilities love it because it saves them from investing in power generation themselves in transmission. It seems like a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, it's complex in a sense, right? A little bit more complex than we've dealt with centralized power plants in the past, but it makes a lot of sense if you are looking at the numbers. That's why you see the commercial and industrials really digging in. They're doing the accounting and they're like, hey, hold on a minute. I think I could save some money here and be a little bit more robust on my site. And then you've got these aggregators who are well established now. They're proficient at what they do. So what it really comes down to often is a communications exercise. It's so hard to understand sometimes that people don't pick it up, whether that's the general energy consumer, the utility, the regulator. It's really a little bit complex, more complex than they've had to deal with before. So it takes some time to get the policy and the regulations in place.
Well, I'm going to have an interview in a couple of weeks with my son-in-law, Trevor Fenton. He's a civil engineer in Calgary. In fact, he looks after buildings for the Calgary Board of Education. That's his job. But he recently put solar on his rooftop in Calgary. And so here you've got a civil engineer who helped design the system, and is, as you can imagine, he keeps track of all the data, and so he's I think as a use case for a residential application, he's an excellent interview. So I'm going to bring him on, viewers, in a couple of weeks, and I think it'd be very, very interesting to see what he has to say as an engineer. Not my son-in-law. He does have. We don't always agree on everything, but
Got it.
on this we do agree. Now, CanRIA, your organization, has released its annual Go Solar Guide. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the Go Solar Guide, we're excited to bring to a web format this year. In the past, we've done a PDF document that we've shared as widely as we can. It's a free resource, kind of a go-to guide for anybody looking to put solar on their property. So it's got all the information that you might need to start scoping it out, get some quotes, assess whatever incentives or costs for electricity in your area of the country. Yeah, and just a really good starting point for anybody looking to go solar.
Like, I know this might be a bit of an uncomfortable question for you, but I need to ask it because a lot of my viewers are asking it on social media, and that is they're seeing a plethora of solar installation companies who are now advertising, and the viewers just aren't familiar with them. And they
Hmm.
wonder if they're fly by night, and there are starting to be some stories, I wouldn't say horror stories, but people who weren't happy with the company that they were working with. And are we seeing maybe an expansion of the industry and some companies that maybe, aren't A plus getting into the market?
Yeah, well, you said at the beginning here that solar has arrived, right? And so this is big business now. There are a lot of people who want to get involved, a lot of people who have been involved for many decades. And so you've got this growing industry, growing sector. Definitely, you're going to have new entrants, and that's why we emphasize in the guide, do your homework and look around, find out who's there. We've got a list of our members who do sign a code of conduct and are held to a bit of a standard that way. But yeah, it's like anything else that you might get in your house, a new furnace or whatever. Get the quotes, do your homework, and we're just trying to provide some of those tools so that they're accessible to the people who are not familiar with it. Because you might have had a furnace in your home from the get-go since you first had a home, but you didn't have solar before, and so it's new.
I have to tell you, we haven't electrified our cars yet, but we have a heat pump, we have an electric water heater, e-bikes.
Excellent.
Viewers will know because a couple of months ago I crashed mine and I had a great. I looked like a squashed tomato afterwards.
I did see that. Yeah, it was
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was. Like, I can laugh now. We weren't laughing so much when we were in the emergency department, I can tell you. But my point here is that what we're seeing is the electrification of the home.
Mhm.
We're smart homes. And one of the big trends that we're just at the very beginning of it, and it makes sense paired with solar, is vehicle to grid integration. So that when your car is parked in your garage and it's all charged up, that the utility, if it needs to, can draw electricity from that battery. You get paid for it. And how far away are we seeing, are we from seeing that as a common thing?
Yeah, I think a lot of that is tied to um, the willingness to adopt in whatever region you are in the country. So we see it globally. There are programs actively happening right now. Different OEMs, vehicle manufacturers, have their own systems that talk to the grid, doing it through the charger, through the car itself. All kinds of options. The technology is definitely is strengthening its value prop on the grid. It's again that piece of complex integration, right? So even just knowing that somebody has bought a car, that's personal information. Um, there are some really innovative ways that I've seen utilities finding that out, finding the postal code of where these cars are being purchased so that they can account for it in their planning going forward. Like, okay, we got 10, we got 20, now we got 50 EVs in the neighborhood. And then that starts to build these tipping points where it now becomes worth it for them to invest in the infrastructure to communicate and to control. And absolutely a fantastic asset to have for the homeowner, especially if they have that control to charge when the sun is up and deplete that battery back if they're in an emergency situation or just want to earn some extra cash by playing in the grid. We're getting there. It's very close, and it's happening elsewhere. We're just got to get our rules right.
Indeed. Now let's talk about the economics of this because I'm most familiar with Alberta, where we have a lot of viewers, and we've had these conversations, and they have joined something called the Solar Club, which
Mhm.
I understand it because I'm not a homeowner. I don't have solar panels yet, so I don't know the intricacies of it. But it sounds like they get about 30 cents a kilowatt hour when they feed electricity back into the grid. And so they build up credits over the months when they're generating a lot, and then they take more electricity in the wintertime when they're generating less. And overall, they wind up with either a credit or a very small bill. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that, the different programs that are out there across Canada that homeowners can take advantage of.
Yeah, great question. Because it is different wherever you are. And so what we've done in the Go Solar Guide is listed them all out for you. So you can go and click through to those links and find out what programs are in your area. So for example, with the Solar Club in Alberta, uh, really innovative group there. Yes, you're getting paid for that electricity. You're also getting paid for some of that renewable energy credit. So you're decarbonizing the Alberta grid essentially. And so they've placed a value on that and been able to buy and sell that in a market. So that's one innovative way to do it. We were also seeing these property assessed clean energy loans, PACE programs, where it gets lumped into your taxes. So you added value to your house, yeah, they bill you on the taxes. That way you can have this kind of low interest loan over long periods, decades, to pay this thing off. If you end up selling the house and there's a bit left on that loan, it goes with the value of the house. You can either pay it off on the sale or it transfers to the new owner, which is knocking down a lot of the barriers to entry, right? You get these really innovative financing opportunities. Now it's accessible to everybody. And yeah, solar has arrived essentially.
Well, speaking of financing, last year I interviewed a virtual power plant company in Calgary, and I think it was the only one at that time. I don't know if there are any more now, but their model was interesting. It's kind of an energy as a service model. So
Mm.
they actually pay to put the panels on your house and the storage and whatever else. They pay that capital cost, which is the big one of the big restrictions on adoption of rooftop solar, and then they make their profit out of saving you money by arbitraging that electricity into the grid. And it sounds like a good model, and I haven't heard anything negative about it. I guess we need to re-interview the CEO there and see how it's working out. But are we seeing that kind of energy as a service model in both the residential and in the business commercial side across Canada?
Yeah, I think it's coming. I'd have to do some more homework to get the list of who all's doing it. But this is what we get with these economies of scale. Once you start being able to deploy not just a few here and there, but as we're seeing in rural Alberta, thousands and thousands at a time, you end up with a different opportunity, right? A different way to aggregate to shave half a cent or something that then accumulates over that larger volume. So yeah, really exciting. And again, it comes down to a lot of the times allowing it on the grid from the utility, the regulations, making sure that it's permissible to operate that way.
That's right, and I'll tell you one area that's very different from Canada and the United States is we have at least eight crown corporations in Canada, maybe seven or eight, that are vertically integrated. So they control everything from the generation, transmission, distribution, retail, the whole nine yards. Really, on Alberta and Ontario are the only provinces that don't have it. And so, if you've got a utility that is reluctant to give up a little bit of its power, a little bit of its say over part of its system, maybe you don't get it as quickly as you do in other parts of the country. But nevertheless, this is the trend and this is where we're going. Now, I live on Vancouver Island where it's rainy in the winter and it's not a great solar resource. And so when I'll be honest with you, I've kind of been waiting for that reason to see maybe down the road we'll get solar. But how, in a community like ours that doesn't have great solar resource, can solar still be economic?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where we see those large crown corporations or others stepping in to sweeten the deal, right? So in BC, you do have some pretty great incentives to get you there because they want the value out of you putting that on your roof for the sake of the grid. On an island system there, I know you're grid tied, but being able to have more generation locally is of benefit. So they'll discount that a little bit for you, but at the same time, we're seeing big growth in efficiency of solar panels, the dropping of costs. So it's always worth a revisit to see if it's now worth it to you. Crunch the numbers, do the math, or find somebody who can help you do that, and it might just pencil out for you.
Just as an aside here, you mentioned the efficiency of the panels, and they're generally around 20, 22%, and then they drop a little tiny bit every year over time. But I mean, they're really 25, 30-year investments, even though
Mhm.
they take maybe a decade to pay off. But I've done some interviews with a company called Rethink Energy out of the UK, and they are following the perovskite. Uh,
Yes.
Panels. And now we're talking about 28, 30% efficiency, a maximum theoretical efficiency of 37%, and
Mhm.
then we're talking about thin film. Never mind the solar panel. Now we get the thin film that you can put all over the place very easily. So it seems like there's a lot of innovation coming on the type of panels, how efficient they are, how cost effective they are, so that they meet a wider variety of needs for both residential and commercial and business.
Yeah, it's almost contrary to what you see with most technology development trends, where you see um, maybe a consolidation, like a convergence on, okay, this is the one that works. Like we have three-bladed wind turbines for a reason, right? That was the best design that made the most sense for everywhere. But here with solar, it's just so diverse in its applications. And I saw an article even just this morning. They've figured out how to make a transparent solar panel that is about 14 to 16% efficient, I believe. That will be it's fully transparent, just collecting the light that we can't see. And so that's every window. It's just, yeah, so many options, and we're going to see that growth. It's also why I think it can be confusing for some customers to know what they're buying or what kind of technology to go with. But I think for the most part, for the residential, even commercial and industrial, we're seeing the efficiencies in scale. So the panels are actually a little bit bigger than they were before. So you're getting more watts per panel, and that reduces the overall install cost because you're setting down one panel instead of three, for example.
I want to make a little point here. It's a broad point, which is that energy is the way we think about it and have for hundreds of years. Is you get a fossil fuel, you burn it, and that releases the energy. You combust it, and then you use a device like an internal combustion engine, a furnace, a boiler, something like that, to then make energy. And it's very inefficient. But we need to think, viewers, you need to think of it this way. The solar, wind in particular, it's like a different form of energy because now you don't have to combust it to create the energy. You create it with your device. You send it over to another device like an electric motor, and the efficiencies are extremely high, 80, 90%, something like that. And so the efficiency compared to fossil fuels can be like two times, three times, four times higher, which ultimately down over the course of, already is cost competitive, but will be the cost competitiveness will increase over time. Your cost and your efficiency will it'll be better for you.
Yeah.
That's where we're going with this, right?
It's a whole paradigm shift, right? As a general consumer of energy, we haven't had this much optionality and this much ability close to home to realize this thing. It always came from somewhere else, unless you're chopping wood for the winter for your wood stove or something. Um, but yeah, it's a really important thing to note because that's an education piece. That's a communication effort. The technology is there. We don't have to necessarily innovate from where we are. We are going to continue to innovate, but it's more understanding it and accepting it and getting at uh, different people who can explain it to you. You see these really amazing community groups that are cropping up everywhere that are excited about solar, excited about battery, these tinkering groups that just want to do different things with it because it's so accessible. And yeah, and the efficiencies as well. It's pretty amazing to see some of these studies around energy transition and how we transition to an electrified economy and our what they term the energy wallet, that total overall amount that you're paying for energy each year is forecasted to go down. A lot of it because of these efficiencies when you switch from gas or gasoline or other types of fossils.
Yeah, and I want to make a point here because we do a lot of theory around the energy transition. And
Mm,
so when you have a new technology, and this is true of any technology, it's like think of it like an S. And at the bottom, when it starts out, it's at the far left of the bottom of the S, and over time, it's really slow. Like it takes forever, decades for the first 5% of the market to be captured, but then it hits what's called an inflection point, and that's that little round part of the S where it becomes costs are low enough, efficiency is high enough, value is high enough. Now it's competitive. And then you get on the hockey stick part of the S curve. And then to get to 50% of the market takes a fraction of the time it took to get to 5%. We are past the inflection point on these technologies. That's the thing that a lot of Canadians don't understand. And it's fairly recent. It's only maybe the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years, depending on what kind of technology you're talking about. So while this may be new, it's been coming for a long, long time. And there are industries and there are supply chains, there are installers that have been growing in the economy to service what you need. And CanRIA's installation guide, its guide to solar, is an important part of that because now you have the information at your fingertips that you can use to make the
so
decision about whether to adopt or not.
yeah, you're not necessarily having to do all the research yourself like some of those early adopters who are probably saying "I told you so" as they're listening to this. Um, we have over a gigawatt of what we call roof or on-site solar in Canada right now. 600 megawatts of that, so well over half of it came in the past 5 years. So there's your hockey stick that's happening. We're seeing utilities that used to process maybe a dozen applications a month to now having to process hundreds, if not thousands, of applications for people wanting to connect their solar installs, leading to what we're at today around just shy of 100,000 on-site or rooftop installations so far in Canada.
Maybe you can help me understand this term. I see it all the time. Net metering. What does that mean?
Yeah, the net metering is a really key policy for what's driven the growth of solar in Canada and elsewhere around the world. Net metering is when you generate, I'll use the kilowatt hour unit. That's kind of like a basic unit of energy consumption.
And the one
Uh,
that shows up on your electricity bill.
that's right. That is and you'll see that how many cents is per kilowatt hour. So when you generate a kilowatt hour of electricity from your solar on your home, that goes back into the grid. They measure that on a meter that now measures two ways instead of just one way into your house, and they net out the kilowatt hour that you take in later.
Ah, okay.
So yeah, you can balance that out, and typically it's done over an annual basis. Although in Quebec, I believe they have some programs that are every 2 years so that those credits that you build up can be used all year round. So in July, when you're making a lot of power, you may actually be making more power than you need. That gets credited to you through the winter as the solar resource is lessened a bit, and then you can end up netting out at the end of the year.
Let's talk about incentive programs because one of the defining features of clean energy technology, it doesn't matter if it's solar, wind turbines, EVs and batteries, heat pumps. The cost upfront, the capital expenditure is quite a bit higher.
Sure.
And people say, oh, well, I can't afford that. Maybe it would be cheaper per unit of electricity, but I can't afford the upfront capital cost. But there are now all kinds of incentive programs, not just from government, but from utilities, because the
Yeah.
utilities want these things. Maybe you could talk about that for a bit.
Yeah, this is something that's actually where probably we spent most of our time before publishing the Go Solar Guide this spring equinox, March 20th, was getting at all those incentive programs. And they're it used to be a fairly easy task to kind of collect those, and now there's just so many from so many different groups that it's exciting, but a lot of work to put together. So they're listed out there. You do get a lot of the governments, per their provincial or federal, um, with large programs that end up anchoring for quite a while, many months. The industry, it's a go-to rebate. But then you get these municipalities who are trying to incentivize it. You get, as you mentioned, utilities that are trying to incentivize. And maybe I'll blur the lines a little bit here. There are rebates for sure, often up to about five, even $10,000 on the upfront cost of that system. But then there are also all these financing programs, low interest loans, all of the, whether it's a 0% or whether it's a PACE with some interest involved, also all kinds of opportunities, and you just got to do a little bit of digging, and hopefully the guide can help.
One of the things that's, I mean, again, this is something that we were promised years ago, but now we're seeing it come to fruition. And that is, we've seen the significant growth in electricity demand. We've had
Mhm.
15 or 20 years where it was just flat. Like since like 2007, we had that big crash, and a lot of big industries like here in BC, pulp mills and sawmills disappeared, and so there was no growth in electricity demand. Now we're seeing BC Hydro, for just as an example, is forecasting 2% a year for the next 20 years. That's huge in this industry. But in the US, they're talking about 3.5%, 4% a year. And they can't even get enough equipment. You know, they can't get things like transformers and transmission lines to it's a real problem. And so what has happened now for the utilities is that they're going to say, well, you know what? If more people generate at home and store the electricity at home, you relieve the stress on the grid. And particularly if there's like an ice storm, as there was in Texas, or there's wildfires like there is in California, the less stress on the grid, the better. And that saves them capital costs. They don't have to build transmission lines. They don't have to build their own utility scale solar panel, whatever the heck, whatever it is that they need. And all of a sudden, light bulbs started going on in utilities boardrooms all across North America. I mean, hey, this benefits us.
Yeah.
And that's a sea change just started a year or two ago.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, it's that scale, that time to educate and inform. I mean, the technology's been there for a while, but it does take a lot of time to socialize this kind of thing and get utilities comfortable with it. I mean, they are responsible for keeping the lights on, not just at home, or the Wi-Fi at home maybe is more important than the lights these days. Um, but the hospital too, right, is depending on it, all the critical infrastructure. So naturally conservative, and uh, once they get comfortable with it, that's when we see, yeah, these get some really great questions from utilities like, does anybody have a battery that I can put on a boulevard, like in front of the meter so that I own it, but I want it right near the transformer? It's really interesting questions. They're getting creative with how they deploy.
Yeah, I don't think Canadians understand the extent to which that new technologies are transforming the power grid. How we make electricity, how we consume electricity, how we trade it. The role of utilities now, we're talking about them becoming like trading platforms where you as now you become not a consumer, you're a prosumer. You produce,
Yeah,
you consume, back and forth, and you can make money at this based on what you've got at, the solar panels, storage, et cetera, that you've got in your home. And it's a brave new world out there. And
yeah,
in the US, where they've had a creaky old grid, they'd underinvested in it for decades. Now all of a sudden they've got all this demand and they've got to go, oh my God, what do we do? This has emerged earlier in the US as a potential part of the solution. Canada has had a much more stable grid, clean, low. Our electricity prices are ridiculously low. And so we've been so successful that in a way, we didn't have the pressure to adopt some of these new technologies because what we had was good enough. But now that we're seeing significant growth, then now the pressure is on for us to look around and be innovative. Because like in BC, you can't build any more hydro dams. Site C is the end of it. So what do you do? How do you double your your generation over the next 10, 20 years if you can't build any more hydro dams. Well, now you got
Yeah,
to get smarter. Now you've got to get
exactly.
smarter. And every utility in Canada is dealing with this. So this is a period of exciting change.
Absolutely. I think Hydro-Quebec is a textbook example here. You've got some of the lowest prices for electricity, definitely in the country, if not globally. Really like 99% clean. Um, and yet their ambition for these small solar installs has just skyrocketed. I think I mentioned earlier that we're approaching 100,000 installs in Canada, which is exciting. They want to do that in Quebec in the next like 5 to 10 years, just double the country's capacity that way. So it is making sense. It is penciling out, and that's why yeah, we'll see. I think more and more of this growth going forward. It comes at a cost, right? There's investment in communications networks, in new control rooms that small distributors didn't have to have before. They were just kind of passing through on the bill. So there's going to take some workforce development and some investments in the grid, but we knew that anyway. And at the same time, it's as we talk about doubling, if not tripling the demand, that's an investment in that future need, not just maintaining the status quo.
Yeah, I think we should point out, and as we have done many times at Energy Media, is that intermittent sources like wind and solar pair really well with hydro because when the wind is blowing, when the sun is shining, and you're getting all this like almost zero cost electricity that floods into markets, what you can do if you go to hydro province is that you just close the generators. You back the water up into the reservoir and you rely on this really cheap solar and wind. And then when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing, you release the water through the hydro dam. And now what that means is the value per megawatt hour that your hydropower caught is now more valuable. The
Yeah.
value goes up because you're using it very strategically at times when people need it the most, and that's when they'll pay the most. And so and that's offset by the really cheap wind and solar. So the ability for Canada to leverage its 60% hydro power generation and to use with intermittence is a huge competitive advantage as we electrify our economy.
Yeah, it's real low-hanging fruit. And at the same time, and I think you've also had some guests on the show here talking about how the value prop shifts even not in the hydro provinces, in others that are
Yeah.
backed by gas, right? Where yes, the capacity factors might be dropping for some of those fossil fuel plants, but their value for the peak demand hours, their value for capacity increases, allowing that really cheap renewable energy to satisfy most of the demand. Yeah, it's a pretty clear pathway at this point. There are a number of countries who are far ahead of us on this journey, and I think that we can have some security in charting that out now.
Bill, this has been an excellent discussion because not only have we talked about very practical things, but about net metering and your guide and so on, but also this larger it's not philosophical, this larger paradigm shift that we're
Yeah,
going through away from fossil fuels over to electricity generated by clean energy technologies. And it's not about climate change anymore. It's not about now it's about economics. It's better business for you to have the clean energy technologies. It's cheaper, more money in your pocket than with the other.
yeah, absolutely.
Well, look, thank you very much. We'll have you on again in the near future because this topic is not going away.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you about my own solar installation next time, maybe.
We'll look forward to it.
All right, take care.
Thanks for watching the show. We are on a mission to reach 10,000 subscribers and over 1 million views. If you're enjoying the content, give us a thumbs up, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for being part of our community.